If you've been wanting to launch your podcast for any length of time, but felt stuck on all the small but very important decisions, such as is this a good podcast name? Should I interview this particular guest? What equipment do I need? How will I fit podcasting into my life? And so on, there's something special I have in store for you. It is so great that I even decided to break my own podcasting CTA rule and pop in before the start of the episode, so I'll be super quick. You can have any and all of your podcasting questions answered and get my feedback and advice tailored to you specifically for 2 weeks straight. That's direct one-to-one access for 2 weeks while we build your new podcast together. To grab one of the remaining 4 spots at this price, that'll go up by 40% in the next round, click the first link you see in the show notes, the one that says limited offer and has a little police car light emoji. Okay, thanks for sticking around. Let's get to the episode. Have you ever noticed how obsessed we are with providing value? Whether we're guesting on someone else's podcast or recording episodes for our own show, we're constantly asking ourselves, am I sharing enough? Am I being helpful enough to the audience? Or am I giving too much away? Let's challenge that today. What if we're focusing on the wrong thing altogether? This is Say Yes to Podcasting, where solopreneurs learn how to start podcasts that attract their ideal clients and do the marketing for them. I'm your host, Anja Lordanic. Say Yes to Podcasting today. You know what I find interesting? Whenever business owners talk about podcasting, whether that's guesting on other people's shows or recording episodes for their own podcast, they tend to obsess over this one thing: value. And before I go on, I have to say I'm guilty of this as well. I always say provide value, be helpful, be valuable to your audience, whoever is listening, whether that's your own audience or borrowed audience. But people tend to ask themselves, am I providing enough value? Am I sharing enough? Or am I giving too much away? Should I save some of this for my paid clients? What part of this should be behind a paywall? And other variations of these questions. And while they are reasonable on the surface, I think they distract us from a more important question. And I believe this is what we should be asking ourselves. Will anyone actually remember what I said? Because if you've ever listened to a brilliant podcast episode and forgotten most of it by the next day, then you already know where this episode is headed and why I was inspired to talk about this in the first place. Because I, as a consumer, forgot about most of the podcast episodes I listened, whether those were interviews or solo podcast episodes. And that got me worried and made me wonder how we can approach this differently, how we can make our content more interesting instead of more quote unquote valuable. So today I want to talk about the difference between being helpful and being memorable to those who are listening, and why understanding the key difference between the two, being helpful and being memorable, can completely change the way you approach content creation in the first place. Whether, again, we're talking about guesting on other people's shows or creating content for your own podcast. Yes, we're all familiar with this word value. Everything needs to be valuable. Wherever you appear online, you need to provide value. In your LinkedIn posts, in your newsletters, in your blog posts, on Instagram, wherever you post content. And I don't want you to take this the wrong way, because being helpful matters. We are here to serve people. We are here to provide value to people and help them overcome certain obstacles, to solve certain problems. But this is what I found. We accidentally started treating value as if it were synonymous with information, as if the person who shares the most in terms of information automatically provides the most value. And I don't believe that's true, because some of the most memorable podcast episodes I've ever listened to contained not that much information, but instead, those episodes, whether they're solo or guested or interviews, they contain some sort of a mindset shift, some sort of a different way of thinking, a new perspective, a new idea, a new way of looking at the same issue. And when you think about it, that's a completely different kind of value that I value more. So, actually, this is something, as you can tell, I've been thinking a lot about recently because I want my content to be the reflection of not only my knowledge, but also my way of thinking. I want to show you how you can think about certain podcasting topics differently. And I hope that it is reflected in my content if you've heard any of my previous episodes before. And this is also something I regularly, quote unquote, practice whenever I'm a guest on other people's shows. I try to tell some stories from different angles. I try to pull different messages from the same stories every time because not everyone will take in the same message the same way. We can go deeper on this topic as well sometime in the future because we're not always exposed to the same type of audience, to the same type of people every time we're a guest on another person's show. But we'll tackle that one on a different occasion. In short, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've probably noticed something, or maybe you haven't because it might be subtle. You tell me. But whatever the case might be, I love a good reframe. I love helping people look at something differently. And sometimes I do wonder if I should be sharing more of the tactical content or how to content instead of the mindset content. Because if I'm honest, sometimes I feel guilty if I give you an episode that is completely on mindset or psychology. But that is not only interesting for me to research and think about and record and publish, but I believe that's more important most of the time than the how to content. And if you're still here, that means you appreciate it. And I thank you because of that. And I occasionally get proof of that, which I'm really appreciative of. I sometimes get messages from you stating this one sentence or this one reframe that helped you look at podcasting differently. And it's rarely about a how to piece of content that I can really pinpoint and share more of. It's more of this one message, this one sentence that stood out, the way I articulated something that really stuck with you that day. And those are the moments that make me realize that podcasting is not necessarily about teaching people everything you know, sharing everything, every piece of value you can think of. It is about helping your listeners, whatever your podcast is about, it's about helping your listeners see something they weren't able to see before or see something in a different light through a different lens. Now, of course, I want to be sensible and address the elephant in the room because my bullet points are telling me to do that right now. Because as service providers, we are naturally overly worried sometimes, or we are quote unquote even scared about giving too much away in our content. We think to ourselves, if I share my entire framework or if I explain this process step by step, if I tell people exactly how I do this, like my proprietary process, why would anyone hire me? If they find out everything, if I share everything, if everything is on the table, why would they have a reason to hire me? And I've pondered over this thought for longer than I'd like to admit. But think about it. When you look at your own buying decisions, that argument, would anyone hire me or why would anyone hire me after I share everything? That argument starts falling apart pretty quickly because I can tell you for a fact, I've hired dozens of people whose podcasts or whose content I've consumed for months before making that buying decision. And those people openly share their thinking, their methods. They often share the how. They share the way they look at some things, their philosophy, if you will. And I still hire them. And now, if I have to pinpoint the reason why I hired them, it's because all of the above. Because I had a complete picture of what they were like, what they stand for, how they do something, and they gave me this whole idea of what working with them would look like. Yes, information is cool, but in 99% of the cases, if we're honest with ourselves, we need help applying it. Because if we start applying something ourselves, we can get frustrated. We can stumble on the first step. 10 questions arise on the second step, and our morale goes down. Again, this is yet another episode I can record in the future because I'm all for experimenting. I'm all for trying new things out. This is what podcasting is about. This is something I preach all the time. But when it comes to solopreneurship and doing this thing called business ourselves, with all of the other stuff happening in our personal lives every single day without fail, we need help with some of the business stuff. So you can give me all the information in the world on a certain topic I am bad at, and I will fail to apply it because I either don't have the motivation, don't have the time, don't have the resources, or something else. That's exactly why information alone will not cut it. Let me ask you a quick question, and I don't expect an answer, but I will pretend as if I'm hearing your answer right now. Would you rather listen to a 30-minute podcast episode that gives you one idea that will stay with you forever, or a 5-hour podcast episode that teaches you absolutely everything on a certain topic you're interested in? I know exactly which one I would choose now, but I have to say I would be tempted to grab or bookmark or save the 5-hour episodes in hopes that I would get back to it and implement some of the stuff that's been shared. But that is not the case. That's not reality. While that 5-hour episode might give you 50 tangible takeaways or practical tips or a whole laundry list of stuff you should do after listening to it, you don't need all of that. You need one thing, or one mindset shift would be more helpful. One shift in perspective would be more beneficial for you and your business and your personal life going forward than all of the other things I mentioned. When someone changes your mind about something, when someone challenges a belief you've had for years, when someone is able to, as I said before, articulate something you could not have put into words yourself, what greater gift could they give you than that? And what greater gift could you give as a podcast host or a podcast guest to the listeners than that? That's what we're trying to do, or that's what we should strive to do. We're not trying to download our entire brain into someone else's. That's not productive. That's not possible. That shouldn't even become a reality. We have this beautiful saying in Croatian precisely about this, about transferring one's brain to another, but I will not attempt to translate it ad hoc right now. Just imagine it. We're talking about those light bulb moments, if you will, when people say, I have never thought about this before. Or imagine a moment where a listener runs to their phone and writes down something you said. This is something that happened to me on multiple occasions. Actually, I did that today. And I love that moment, and I hope to provide that moment for someone else. Maybe with this very episode, and maybe I will never find out. So, to end this episode, please remember that the question is not, am I giving too much away? Because that's kind of a selfish question to ask. You're not asking that from the point of view, am I overwhelming the listener? But rather, am I giving too much of myself away for free and losing on something in the process? Instead, the question is, what will people still remember years from now? It's clear as day that podcast episodes and content in general that changes us is not the content that teaches us everything. It is the type of content that changes the way we see something. And when you think about it, if it wasn't clear until now, that's exactly what I tried to do in this episode. I didn't give you a script to follow or a framework or a step by step guide. I didn't create a checklist. Instead, I tried to make you look at this topic differently and let you know that you can never share too much. You can never be too selfless. And before you come at me, I'm not saying you shouldn't have boundaries, but being selfless in terms of a podcast, when you're a podcast host and a podcast guest, you are in charge of your time and the way you distribute, the way you share information. When that time slot is over, you can go on your merry way and continue living your life the way you used to live it. But people will get value for months and years going forward. That's what I'm trying to say when I say you can never be too selfless with a podcast. Anyway, I hope I gave you some food for thought because that's the point of every podcast episode I create, including this one in particular, I should say. I hope that it gave you a new perspective, a helpful reframe. I hope that I provided you with something different, something new to think about, to ponder whenever you sit down and decide to record your own podcast episode or write a text based piece of content. Consider this as if you're changing someone's world just a tiny bit with the words you're speaking and the content you're creating. And if you remember this little thought tomorrow while you're making coffee, then this episode has done its job. Thanks for sticking around. I will see you next week.